Good afternoon. I'm Tabitha, and together with my partners Matt and Doel, we are going to share with you our learnings from the machine that changed the world. Let's start with the agenda. First, we are going to share with you the origins of lean production, the elements of lean production, taking a deeper dive and comparing some of the key differences between mass production and lean production, and then we are going to conclude with diffusing lean production. So to begin with craft production, here's a nice example. These vehicles were really unique, one-of-a-kind vehicles, only affordable to the wealthy. These were all made by hand. The primary objective of these vehicles was speed, although at that time, when they were first created, it was, no more than 10 miles per hour. But that was fast for them back then. And then, as we mentioned, customization. The business models for these firms that were producing vehicles in the craft method was to have a central entrepreneur working with clients directly and then outsourcing each of the parts of the vehicle to small machine shops within the local geographic area, and then they would assemble all of those parts. These workers that actually built the different parts of the vehicle were very much highly skilled. Some of them went through apprenticeships and different things. A modern day example of craft production would be Aston Martin, very high-end, luxurious, handmade, high-quality product. So mass production came into play in the 1900s, and you can see this shot of Ford Motor Company in Highland Park. And it was developed by Henry Ford, really, and here's the Model A, which deployed in 1903. And between 1903 and 1908, that's when a variety of vehicles were developed, and finally we landed with the Model T that you can see here. The primary objective for vehicles that were created under mass production was manufacturability, so the ease of the workers being able to put the different pieces together instead of having to do a lot of skill-intensive work. Easy repairs for the user, so each vehicle came with its own little manual, and it was thought that anyone with their average box of tools could really just take out a couple, work on the car, and get it back on the road. Also, very much key is inexpensive. They really wanted to, exploit the economies of scale and really trying to carry forth that cost savings to their customers. And they did that. So since the launch of the Model T in 1908, the prices dropped continuously. Also, their business model, unlike craft production, is unskilled workers, considered interchangeable. These workers did not need, any kind of special training. It was really more of a 3-minute training to know how to put one piece together with the other and move the vehicle forward. They did focus on quantity over quality, kind of a move the metal mentality, and a good enough attitude. So, origins of lean production. IG Toyota of the Toyota Motor Company visited Ford and found the following there. Extremely high volume of vehicles that were produced, hundreds of specialized machinery, a lot of these doing just one operation, perhaps on multiple parts. Interchangeable assembly line workers, as we discussed, workers that do not add value to the final product, so they had layers of individuals, apart from the assembly people who were working directly on the vehicle. They all reported to a leader, who might have reported to another leader, etc. They had industrial engineers, quality specialists, die changing specialists, etc. Also, a lot of rework being done, very expensive rework at the end of the assembly line. So with that move the metal mentality, it was, if there's a defect, it'll get caught at the end. Just keep moving type of a scenario. So many of these aspects would not work for Toyota at that time. They were small, they had a lower operating budget to work with, so they developed their own concepts that sort of played into some of those mass production concepts. And so here we have Taiichi Ohno, and he with IG Toyota really developed all of the Toyota production system, which is essentially lean production. So first example we'll give is SMED, single minute exchange of die, and this was a huge difference between mass production, being that they focused on economies of scale, bringing that efficiency, and they all had a full day to exchange a die, where Taichi tinkered for a long time and finally figured out how to take that time down to less than 10 minutes for exchanging these dies, which allowed him to produce much smaller batches of each part. So as opposed to a plant like Ford, where they're producing thousands upon thousands of these pieces, holding them in inventory, which is very expensive, or perhaps producing some defective parts, and you might not even figure that out until you're halfway into this 1,000-part batch. So they had a lot of savings by switching to those smaller batch sizes. Japanese unions gained a lot of power and authority during the time of lean production concepts being developed, and with that came the company as community. These workers were not willing to accept being interchangeable as, they were in mass production, and they really were looking for an employer for life that would provide them with fulfilling work and, honest wages and things like that. And Toyota really provided that for them. They did guarantee employee for life for their workers and expected to get just as much out of them as they were giving to them. And so oftentimes they would work together on Kaizen, process improvement projects, and think of opportunities for improvement within their direct work area. They worked on things like eliminating waste, MUDA, as we all know. I'm sure a lot of these concepts are familiar to us since we went through the ASQ session a few weeks ago. And one example of eliminating MUDA was eliminating some of those layers that we talked about that some of the mass production agencies had. So behind the assembly, actual workers, they all reported to someone, so had different specialists and things like that. So Toyota really eliminated all of that and put the ownership right on those assembly workers to give them more fulfilling work, knowing that they could live up to those expectations. Also, they sought perfection. So whereas Ford had sort of a good enough attitude, Toyota was always looking to have, the best quality, do it right the first time. These are definitely concepts of lean production. And one way that they did that was they had cords above every workstation, and any time that an issue came to one of the stations that they could not solve immediately, they were to pull this cord, stop the entire production assembly line, and everyone would kind of huddle up and talk about, okay, what is the root cause of this scenario? They would do the 5 why analysis, figure out what it is, and solve that problem at its root cause so that it would never happen again and never have that issue again. So finally, the last piece we'll talk about is Kanban, and that's really the essence of just-in-time. So they actually have a very simple method that they implemented, and it was that they had a bin of parts, and then once that bin got to your station, that means it's time to be filled with parts and move on to the next. So you weren't producing things unless the people in front of you, the stations in front of you, were ready to take those items and process them further. So really only getting the items when they are needed.
Hi, I'm Doel Salcedo, and I'll be covering the elements of lean production. We'll be discussing product design, engineering, supply system, car sales, and finally the globally lean supply chain. For running the factory, the authors did comparison between a classic mass production and a classic lean production assembly plants. The first one, GM in Framingham, Massachusetts, and the lean production plant over in Toyota City in Takaoda, Japan. Now you can see here the vast differences between the two, between value-added and non-value-added workers, how much inventory was located at each workstation, and how the line was balanced. Additionally, the biggest factor here was how much rework was done at the end of each assembly line for defects. You can see that the mass production line had a large rework area, where the lean production line had very little defects and very little rework in order to get the finished product out of the factory door. Additionally, at the very end there, the NUMMI plants was a joint venture between GM and Toyota, in which GM began learning lean from Toyota and began enacting it in the United States. Now, these plants were able to carry out the same kind of quality, but they're not able to retain the same inventory levels as a lean plant because of their far location away from the suppliers over across the Pacific. Now, when it came to designing the car, you can see here the time differences between the two, between lean and mass production. Now, whereas lean required almost half the effort to design and produce a new vehicle the mass production system did. Additionally, the SHUSA was that project team lead for Lean, where it was a person who owned the vehicle from product life cycle, from inception all the way to death. Additionally, that SHUSA's team was a team of employees that were with that product for life, and that life of that vehicle. Now, in the mass production arena, the team leader pulled together temporary employees and kept pulling together as many people as he needed as the product got further along. All these people, though, however, didn't have any race strings attached to the vehicle and were returned to the regular permanent jobs once the job was completed. They did not stay with the vehicle for the whole life cycle. An additional thing that Lean did in order to lower design time was simultaneous die production. So the die producers were brought in on the ground floor when they began designing the body, and so dies were able to be produced rough cuts throughout the entire project until the body was finalized. The mass production, body production, the die production didn't even begin until the very end after the vehicle was completely finalized. And that would add on more time into designing the vehicle and rolling it out to market. Now, those Lean systems provided a higher variety and new products. As you can see, the Corolla came out about every 4 to 5 years, the new generation and new design. And this is a great example of that Lean design system. Now, for coordinating the supply chain between assemblers and suppliers, you saw that Toyota had semi-autonomous suppliers, where these were semi-independent companies that worked primarily for Toyota, but had business with other companies as well. Now, with mass production, GM pretty much owned their suppliers. Ford owned their suppliers, and they were small little branches of those motor companies. Now, for the scope of work, Toyota would allow the suppliers to go ahead and design end items such as seats and dashes, whereas the mass production system would require that assembler to create design drawing themselves before giving it to the suppliers. This again added more lead time onto creating the actual end item that would be supplied for assembling the car. Additionally, there was an issue between trust and transparency. In the Lean system, there's complete transparency, so you know exactly how much it costs the supplier to make the part and what their profit will be. This allowed mutual profit sharing and allowed for each supplier and assembler to maintain a better business relationship, where quality was the concern and cutting costs was the concern. Now, in the mass production, it's all about getting the lowest bid as possible, get your foot in the door, and then raising your price every year in order to make back the money you lost in your first year. There's no trust at all between the assembler and the supplier. Finally, the importance of quality is there as well. When we talked about just in time, whereas if a part doesn't show up and is not correct at the right time, the right place, it's going to mess up the entire inventory and supply system. So this is extremely important in the Lean area. Now, dealing with customers, we're not just talking about dealing with end item users, but also dealing with car dealers. Now, the feedback would roll back into the Lean system, and Toyota's looked to make vehicles and design them based upon the customer feedback, whereas GM was seeking to make vehicles and design them based on designing for manufacturability and just make it easier to build and easier to design across the whole board. Now, the way the dealers were treated between the two car companies and two systems was completely different as well. Whereas GM would almost sell their vehicles to their dealers in the American style, where they'd only give selected bits of information, and they only wanted to close the deal. They additionally would push vehicles down the dealers in order to use the dealers as a buffer between the factory and the customers. Whereas the dealer in Toyota would basically take orders to build vehicles. So they were more of a pull system to go to deliver vehicles that were going right to customers. Their showroom had only 3 or 4 vehicles, whereas you go to a showroom today and it's got hundreds of vehicles in there. Additionally, between the dealer and customers, you had that loyalty. So whereas here we don't feel loyal to our dealers, because they don't earn our loyalty. In Japan, the dealers wanted to have the customers return, to always keep buying the vehicle from them. So when it came to warranty claims, the Japanese system would take care of those vehicles, even if they were out of tolerance for warranties, because they're ashamed because their vehicle had defects on it. Whereas here, if you might have a valid warranty, you still got to fight with the dealer and haggle for him to do his job and take care of that issue you might have in your vehicle. So the end point is that Lean distribution is also part of the enterprise. It's all about not just about production and manufacturing, but also how you get the vehicles to the customers. Managing the Lean enterprise is extremely important as well. And we've seen different cases from extreme centralization, decentralization, strategic alliances. However, the book authors recommended an integrated global personnel system in which you had a lot of horizontal shifting of employees to gather experience in different companies and working on different projects across the entire globe, and eventually, and also building those product teams, stay with the life of that product. And this would create a better variety of vehicles and a better car company overall with investing in personnel capital.
Hello everyone, I'm Matt McCloskey. I'm going to be covering the section of the book entitled Diffusing Lean Production. So we've already heard what lean production is, and I'm going to go over what it takes to get traditional mass-producing companies to adopt the lean production ideology. So the first thing we're going to go over are the roadblocks for adopting lean production. The first one is nationalism. American companies and American workers have a hard time accepting that an idea that originated in Japan is better than our mass production ideas that we came up with at home. So what this results in is decades of delay of transferring these better manufacturing techniques to America simply because of that nationalism. The other thing is lack of experience. So managers running these American companies, they just don't fully understand the lean concepts, and they're not committed to implementing them. So these large changes that would need to be made to make their plant lean just seem way too difficult, and it's very intimidating. So how can we get past some of these roadblocks? The first thing, and the thing that the book emphasizes the most, is that mass producers need direct competition from lean producers. So they need to see a lean company in their same market performing better than them in order for them to finally implement these lean changes and change for the better and become more efficient. The second thing that can help get past these roadblocks is a better industrial finance system. So these companies need backing to make these changes, and it's an investment. It's going to cost money up front. The third thing is a crisis. So the book talks about several occasions where companies have a gloomy financial outlook, and they finally get to the point where they just have to do something drastic. And so that's when all the workers and the individual departments of the company stop worrying about their own individual goals and start focusing on the goals of the company and what they need to do to save the company. So this increases the team spirit, and those big changes that everyone thought was too difficult to implement in the first place now all of a sudden becomes easier because that sense of desperation spurs change. So an example of that is at Ford Motors. So in 1980, Ford had a crisis, and the future of the company was in jeopardy. So the executives took a trip to the Mazda production facility in Japan, and they learned some of the lean techniques. And they saw that the Mazda production facility was able to manufacture a comparable automobile for 40% less effort than mass-producing companies could do. So seeing this and the workers, coming together because they knew the company was in jeopardy, that finally broke the old ways of thinking at Ford. So they all started working together. They started making changes to make the business as a whole more efficient rather than the individual departments more efficient. So after implementing these lean production ideas, Ford greatly improved their performance, and so it was a huge impact on their business. Okay, so what are some ways that we can implement lean production? Well, first off, implementing the lean production system takes many years of experience. So that's one thing that the book talks about a lot, is that it's not just something that you can quickly do. You have to have someone that's done it for a long time to help you. And so as we all saw in the book The Goal, the plant manager many times had to go back to the drawing board and change things and figure things out because it's not a simple process. So one of the most effective ways that the authors of the book have found to deal with this is by transplanting experienced managers from well-established lean production sites. So you can take someone that has the experience, bring them to the new lean operation, and have them instill all the things that they've learned to make the system better. The third thing is that companies must be willing to make drastic changes. So becoming lean is an all-in bet. You have to go fully after it and make all these changes, otherwise you're not going to see the benefit of it. So the last bullet here is a quote from a lean company executive that remain nameless in the textbook, but the quote says, "We believe our production system with its many nuances can be learned by anyone, but it takes 10 years of practice under expert guidance," which I think it's an excellent quote, and that shows that it's not just something that you can quickly implement in a plant. It has to be something that you fully understand and fully commit to learning. So another aspect of implementing lean production is removing workers from the system. So after you've implemented lean production ideas into a manufacturing facility, it's naturally going to get more efficient. So you have to remove workers in order to keep the work pace the same. So everyone needs to be working still at a brisk pace so that that same level of effort and desire for improvement still exists. So the basis of lean production is that the employees, the workers, are the ones that help come up with ideas for improvement. So if they're not having to work as hard because there's too many people there, so their level of effort isn't high, then they're not going to put a lot of thought into improvements to make the system better. So that is absolutely essential, is to keep the workforce only at what it's needed and not extra. So the natural question to that would be, well, then what do you do with all these workers that you've removed? And the book suggests retraining them. So train them for just other skill jobs within the company, or a job in even a different industry or with a different company. So it's not answered very well, and to me this seems like a big issue with lean production, and one that's not answered very clearly as to what we would do with all of these extra workers if lean production were rolled out widely all of a sudden. There wouldn't be really many places for these workers to go. So that's one issue I've seen with implementing lean production on a large scale in Western countries. The last thing that I want to talk about, to kind of wrap things up, is how the lean production system behaves in a cyclical market. So the first thing that Japanese companies do is they establish what's called a reciprocal obligation. So what this is it's establishing a relationship where workers know that they share the same fate as their employers, and that suppliers share the same fate as their assemblers. So what this does is it creates kind of a team spirit between the two to make them work together better for improvements and do whatever it takes to survive and to keep profits up. The second thing that Japanese companies do is they pay their workers largely in bonuses. So what this does is it gives a lot more incentive for improvement, for each worker to try and improve profits, because that would directly increase their bonus. And the second thing is it makes them feel kind of tied to the company, because they know that if the company does poorly, their wage is going to be cut. And so obviously they don't want to do that, so it kind of, again, makes them a team with the company and always pushing them to make the company operate better. So the third concept that kind of goes along with this is that when the market slows down, so in a cyclical market, there's ups and downs. When it goes to a down, that they can keep production the same. And the way they can do that is because they can cut prices. So when profits go down, the amount of bonuses that the company is giving out goes down. So therefore, they can cut prices on the goods that they're selling to allow the production rate to stay the same. So no workers have to be laid off and production doesn't slow. But the workers have to be willing to take a pay cut. So this is pretty controversial, and this runs into a lot of issues because it's never been tested. So the Japanese market doesn't behave like the United States market. It doesn't have huge oscillations up and down, and so this has never been tested to see if workers are willing to take these kind of pay cuts and stick around. These last two slides show a quick comparison between the United States auto market and the Japanese auto market between 1947 and 1989. As you can see, the United States market is very cyclical, and the Japanese market is very stable. So it's more of a challenge to implement lean production into the Western market because it's so much different. Here we have the production over the same time period between the US and Japan. Towards the late 70s, the US production dropped off dramatically. It was a downswing in this cycle. But as you can see, Japanese production was actually increasing. So during this time period, that's when the West saw how well the Japanese were doing and started to pay attention to lean production and actually started implementing some of their techniques. So this was kind of the stepping stone that really kicked off diffusion of lean production into the West. Well, that concludes our summary of the book, The Machine That Changed the World. Just to recap on some of the points we touched on today. The first thing we went through was the origins of lean production. So we did a brief timeline of the auto industry and then went through the different types of production techniques that existed. Next, we went on to describe actually what lean production is. So we talked about how it feeds into factory operations, product design, supply chain management, and customer service. And then finally, we went through diffusing lean production. So we talked about some of the roadblocks that are preventing lean production from being implemented, how to actually implement it, and then how it behaves in dynamic markets after it's been implemented. So that's it. We hope you all enjoyed it. We look forward to any questions that you guys may have, and have a good day.